It was a quiet night at Kensington Palace on September 6th, 2012. The rain fell steadily against the windows as Princess Catherine sat alone in her private study. The lights were still on, long past midnight. On the desk beside her was a phone, her phone, and on its glowing screen appeared a single name that made her heart freeze: Rose Hanbury. At first, Catherine thought it was a mistake, but as she scrolled through the messages, disbelief turned into shock, and shock into pain. Every word confirmed what she had feared for months. Prince William had never truly ended his secret connection with Rose. The late-night messages, the private meetings disguised as official events, the careful silence of those around them. It was all true. Inside the palace, silence spread like a storm. The woman once hailed as the future queen of compassion now sat motionless, staring at the screen that shattered her faith. It was said that since the death of Princess Diana, no night within the royal walls had felt this heavy. Catherine closed her eyes, her hands trembling. Everything she had endured, the battle with cancer, the struggle to keep her family together, the second chance she had given him, seemed meaningless in that moment. And now, one question remains, not just for him, but for all who once believed in a royal fairy tale. If it were you, could you forgive someone who broke your heart twice? Tonight, we uncover the full story behind Catherine's discovery, a revelation that may mark the beginning of another royal tragedy. But to understand how it all began, we must return to where the fairy tale first took shape, the love story between a prince and an ordinary girl. There are love stories that seem to be written by destiny itself, not dazzling from the start, not loud or dramatic, but quietly powerful, built on understanding, patience, and in something far deeper than attraction. The story between Prince William and Catherine Middleton was one of those rare tales. It began in the quiet coastal town of St. Andrews, Scotland, where the ancient university, with its cobblestone streets and sea breeze, set the stage for a romance that would one day captivate the world. In 2001, William, then a young man burdened by the weight of royal expectations, arrived to study geography, seeking a glimpse of ordinary life, something his royal blood had never allowed him to experience. Catherine was there too, a girl from Berkshire with grace, intellect, and an unassuming charm that stood out in the crowd. They met not at a ball or a grand event, but in the most ordinary way, through friends, in shared lectures, in the mundane rhythms of student life. For the first time, William was not the future king. He was simply William. And for Catherine, he was not a prince to be chased, but a friend whose laughter felt genuine. What drew him to her was not her beauty alone, but the way she carried herself, confident yet gentle, poised but approachable. She had an ease about her, a warmth that reminded him of something he'd long been missing since his mother's death: comfort, stability, and unconditional care. Their friendship grew over time, nourished by quiet dinners, long walks by the sea, and laughter shared in student apartments. Then came the moment that changed everything: the charity fashion show. Catherine walked down the runway in a sheer dress, elegant yet daring, and William's heart stopped. From that moment, he saw her differently. The friendship had shifted, a spark had ignited. The press would later romanticize that very moment, the day the prince fell in love. But to those who knew them, it was more than a fairy tale moment. It was the beginning of something real. After graduation, their relationship deepened, though not without trials. The royals' world is not kind to outsiders, and the scrutiny that followed Catherine was relentless. Every move, every expression, every outfit was analyzed. Yet, she endured, not by fighting back, but by remaining herself, calm, composed, unshaken. There was a time, around 2007, when they briefly broke up. The distance between their worlds had grown too wide, and the weight of expectation too heavy. William, torn between duty and love, chose to step back. Catherine, though heartbroken, did not chase him. She disappeared quietly from the public eye, spending time with family and close friends, showing a kind of dignity that only made her more admired. And perhaps that's what brought him back. William realized what life without her truly meant, an emptiness that no royal obligation could fill. Within months, they reconciled, this time stronger, surer, ready to face the storm together. By 2010, after nearly a decade of love, distance, and endurance, William proposed to Catherine during a private trip to Kenya. He gave her the sapphire ring that once belonged to his mother, Diana, a symbol not just of inheritance, but of continuity for the world. It was the ultimate romantic gesture. For William, it was a quiet promise that he would try to give her the love and security his mother never had. Their wedding, held on April 29, 2011, was nothing short of a spectacle. Millions around the world watched as Catherine, radiant in her Alexander McQueen gown, walked down the aisle of Westminster Abbey. William, in his red Irish Guards uniform, looked every bit the prince of fairy tales. Yet beneath the grandeur, there was something profoundly human in the way they smiled at each other, as if the rest of the world had faded away. That day was more than a royal event. It was a symbol of hope, of new beginnings, of a monarchy reborn through love rather than duty. People believed, with genuine conviction, that this was the marriage that would break the curse. Unlike his father, William will not repeat the tragedy of Charles and Diana. They said, and for years that belief held true. Their early years of marriage were blissful. They moved to Anglesey, far from the cameras, where William served as a search and rescue pilot and Catherine learned the rhythms of quiet domestic life. They cooked together, took long walks on the beach, and tried to live as normally as possible. The world adored them, the perfect modern couple balancing love, duty, and family. Then came their children, Prince George in 2013, Princess Charlotte in 2015, and Prince Louis in 2018. With each birth, their bond seemed to deepen. Catherine shone with a grace reminiscent of Diana, but marked by her own quiet strength. She became the heart of the royal family, a symbol of stability and warmth amid an often cold institution. William, for his part, seemed devoted. He often spoke with affection about his wife and children, about how Catherine kept him grounded. Together, they appeared unshakable, the ideal royal couple in a modern age. But behind palace walls, reality is rarely as perfect as the photographs suggest. The pressures of royal life, the endless public appearances, the media's obsession with every detail, they take their toll. Yet Catherine endured it all with elegance, her composure unbroken even under the harshest spotlight. To the world, they were the picture of happiness. And perhaps, for a time, they truly were. But history, it seems, has a cruel sense of irony. For in the quiet moments between royal engagements and polished smiles, small cracks began to appear, invisible to outsiders, but deeply felt by those within. There were whispers, faint at first, that something in their marriage had shifted, a distance, a change in tone, a shadow that neither of them could name. The tabloids speculated, the internet buzzed, but Catherine ignored it all. She had faith in William, in their love, in the life they had built together. And so, the perfect royal love story continued, at least on the surface. William and Catherine smiled for the cameras, attended royal duties hand in hand, and raised their children in the public eye. Yet deep down, something was changing, something that neither of them was ready to confront. It was early March 2024 when the palace released a statement that silenced the entire nation. The message was short, almost clinical, but its weight was unbearable. The Princess of Wales has been diagnosed with cancer and is currently undergoing treatment. For the public, it came as a shock. For those who knew her, it was the sound of a world collapsing. Catherine, the woman who had always seemed so composed, so radiant, had been fighting an invisible battle for months. She had smiled through public appearances, carried out her duties with grace, and stood by her husband's side as if nothing was wrong. Only now did people realize how much strength it must have taken to hide her pain. The following week, Kensington Palace windows remained dark. No laughter echoed through the gardens. The royal schedule emptied, and a new kind of silence took hold. The silence of fear, of prayers whispered behind closed doors. Catherine withdrew from public life and moved to Sandringham, where the sea wind carried the scent of solitude. In that sprawling estate, far from the noise of London, she tried to heal. The days blended into one another, marked only by the quiet hum of medical machines and the soft footsteps of her private nurse. There were moments when the pain became unbearable, when she clutched her rosary in trembling hands and whispered, "I can do this." Her mother, Carol Middleton, often stayed by her side, reading softly from a book or simply sitting in silence. The children visited occasionally, their innocent laughter a fleeting warmth that filled the cold rooms. George would hold her hand and promise to be brave. Charlotte would draw her pictures of sunny gardens, and little Louis would ask when Mummy would come home. Catherine smiled and said, "Soon, my darling. Very soon, Farman." But deep inside, she was terrified that soon might never come. In the meantime, Prince William carried on with his royal duties. He appeared in public, shaking hands, attending ceremonies, his face calm but eyes heavy with worry. The press praised his strength, calling him the devoted husband, the steadfast heir. Yet, behind the palace walls, Catherine's world felt increasingly distant from his. She rarely saw him. Sometimes days passed with only a message relayed through staff or a brief phone call between his meetings. Still, Catherine refused to doubt him. In her heart, she believed in the promise he had made on their wedding day, that no matter what came their way, they would face it together. She remembered his words, whispered as they stood before the altar at Westminster Abbey. "You are my strength, my home, my heart." She clung to those words on the nights when pain robbed her of sleep. When the wind howled against the windows of Sandringham, she would look at their wedding photo on the bedside table and whisper, "We'll make it through, won't we?" Her doctors often told her that recovery depended as much on the mind as on the body. So she tried to stay strong. She meditated, wrote in her journal, and found comfort in the small things, the scent of lavender in the garden, the sound of rain on the glass, the letters from well-wishers around the world. But beneath the surface of her calm, there was loneliness, a quiet ache that grew each day. She missed her children's laughter echoing through the halls, the warmth of William's hand in hers, the life they had built together. She missed feeling like herself. Sometimes she would walk alone by the lake near Sandringham, wrapped in a wool coat and scarf, her figure thin and fragile against the gray sky. She would pause to watch the swans glide across the water, and in those moments, she felt small, not as a princess, not as the future queen, but as a woman fighting for her life, desperate to hold on to the love that had once defined her world. And yet, despite everything, Catherine's faith in William remained unshaken. When aides mentioned how tirelessly he was working on royal engagements, she smiled proudly. "That's my husband," she would say. She believed he was doing it all for her, to keep their family strong, to protect their children from worry. She never imagined that distance could become a wall, that silence could hide more than words. The spring days grew longer. Catherine began responding well to treatment, though she tired easily. Her doctors spoke with cautious optimism. The palace, Mainz too, reassured the public that the princess was making good progress. The nation sighed in relief. But behind those comforting updates, Catherine's reality was more fragile than ever. Her strength was returning, but her trust, though she didn't yet realize it, was standing on the edge of something she could not see. Late one evening, as the lamps cast a soft glow across her room, she sat by the window, watching the sun disappear behind the fields. The world outside was calm, but she felt a strange unease, a restlessness which she couldn't name. She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to shake it off. Perhaps it was just the anxiety of recovery. She thought perhaps it was nothing. She didn't know that miles away. In London, another story was beginning to unfold, one that would shatter everything she had fought so hard to protect. Because while Catherine was battling her illness one day at a time, outside the palace walls, another storm was quietly forming. The princess is fighting for her life, but where is her husband? The question first appeared in a late-night online forum. Then, like a spark in dry grass, it spread. Within days, tabloids began hinting at a familiar name. Rose Hanbury, the Marchioness of Cholmondeley, elegant, poised, and a known acquaintance of the Waleses. Suddenly, every photo, every glance, every event where William and Rose appeared within the same frame was pulled apart, analyzed, and fed to an audience hungry for scandal. The irony was cruel. Catherine, fragile from her cancer treatments, had retreated to Sandringham for peace and healing. William, meanwhile, had taken on royal duties alone. He appeared calm, devoted, and responsible, a husband fulfilling his duty while his wife fought a private war. But as weeks passed, the narrative shifted. What was once a devoted prince standing by his wife became a man escaping his grief in familiar company. The story ignited when a blurry photo surfaced. William at a private gathering, his laughter frozen mid-frame, seated too close to Rose. It could have been nothing. A friendly moment, a coincidence. But to a public that had seen this film before, it felt like déjà vu. Another Charles and Camilla, screamed the headlines. Poor Catherine, just like Diana, sighed the morning shows. For years, the monarchy had rebuilt its image around the Waleses. They were modern, grounded, and united. William and Catherine had represented everything the House of Windsor wanted to be: stable, wholesome, untouched by the poison of past affairs. And yet all it took was a rumor, a whisper of betrayal, to pull that fragile image apart. Buckingham Palace stayed silent. No statement, no denial, just silence. A silence so heavy that it began to sound like confession. Meanwhile, Catherine stayed out of sight. Only a few staff members and her mother, Carol Middleton, were allowed near her. Inside the quiet walls of Sandringham, she focused on her treatment, on her children's laughter, on the soft sunlight filtering through the curtains. She tried to ignore the noise outside, but the noise grew louder. A friend later described her during that time as a woman caught between two storms, one inside her body and one outside her control. She had heard the rumors, of course. You couldn't avoid them, not when every headline carried your husband's name alongside another woman's. But Catherine was not one to react publicly. She had built her life on composure. Even when her heart broke, the world would never see her cry. She didn't want to believe it, the friend continued. She'd forgiven small things before, moments of distance, long absences, but betrayal during her illness? That was something else entirely. People close to her noticed the shift. Calls between her and William grew shorter. His visits became less frequent. When he did come, the air was polite but cold. She asked about the children. He talked about his duties. They avoided the subject, the rumor that sat between them like a ghost neither dared to name. Out in the world, the press had moved from speculation to obsession. Old photos resurfaced from 2019, the first time the Rose Hanbury story had appeared briefly before being buried. Now, journalists revisited those archives with renewed interest. Were the signs there all along? One headline asked. Another simply wrote, "The curse repeats itself." Royal commentators tried to calm the storm, but their words rang hollow. The British public, weary from decades of royal scandals, began drawing their own conclusions. Social media lit up with sympathy for Catherine. Hashtags like #StandWithCatherine trended worldwide. People posted old clips of her kindness, her smile, her quiet grace beside William at public events. She doesn't deserve this. One post read, "Not after everything she's done for the monarchy." But sympathy is a double-edged sword. While it comforted Catherine's supporters, it also deepened her sense of isolation. For the first time, she realized that people pitied her. And pity, for a woman as proud and self-contained as Catherine. Hurt more than gossip ever could. At Sandringham, she began spending long hours alone in the gardens. Those who saw her described a woman present but distant, someone who seemed to be staring at something far beyond the horizon. Perhaps she was thinking about her marriage, perhaps about the promises whispered years ago, when she had stood before the world in a white gown, believing that love was unbreakable. In sickness and in health, he had said, till death do us part. She had replied. Those words haunted her now. She had once believed that her marriage was built on something stronger than the royal facade. They had endured so much together: press intrusion, family tensions, public scrutiny, but illness had stripped away the armor, revealing the raw truth beneath. When she was weakest, when she needed protection, love was supposed to shield her. Instead, it was crumbling. And yet, even in her pain, Catherine refused to lash out. She didn't call the press. She didn't confront him in public. Her silence became her shield. But for those who truly saw her, that silence was filled with heartbreak. Sometimes, said one insider, you can tell when someone's heart is broken not by their tears, but by their calm. The British press began to notice her absence at key royal events. The official reason remained her health, but whispers said she no longer wanted to stand beside William under the public eye. Behind closed doors, senior aides debated damage control. Should the palace deny the affair? Should William appear more with his wife? Should they bring Rose into the picture to silence speculation? But the monarchy's greatest fear wasn't public anger. It was the past. Every image of Diana, every mention of Camilla, every memory of betrayal loomed like a curse they could never outrun. For millions watching, it was impossible not to draw parallels. A beloved princess suffering in silence, a husband surrounded by whispers, and a royal family that once again seemed to value image over empathy. By July 2024, the rumor had reached every corner of the world. American talk shows debated it. European tabloids splashed it across front pages. Even late-night comedians joked. The Windsors never change, do they? But in Sandringham, there was no laughter, only the quiet hum of medical machines and the ticking of time. Catherine's illness had weakened her body, but the betrayal, real or imagined, had wounded something deeper. Maybe he's just lost, she confided once to a friend. Maybe we both are. The friend didn't answer. There were no words left to heal a heart that had already begun to break. As July faded into August, the palace made another statement about Catherine's ongoing recovery, thanking the public for their support. But to those who read between the lines, something had changed. The warmth, the optimism of earlier updates was gone. What remained was formality, controlled, precise, distant. And then came the silence again. No new photos, no joint appearances, just absence. The kind of absence that speaks louder than words. And so, as the world debated and speculated, Catherine continued her quiet fight, not just against her illness, but against the crumbling of everything she once believed in. By the end of 2024, the air around Kensington Palace had grown quieter. The crowds that once gathered outside its gates no longer came to leave flowers or cards of encouragement. The press had turned its gaze elsewhere, and within the palace walls, Catherine was finally learning to breathe again. Her doctors had called it a turning point. After months of intensive treatment, countless nights of nausea, exhaustion, and uncertainty, she was declared to be in remission. The word itself sounded fragile, like a whisper of hope after too long in the dark. Her body had begun to heal, but her heart, that was another matter entirely. When Catherine returned to Sandringham, the late autumn light stretched across the fields in golden ribbons. She began to walk again, slowly at first, tracing the quiet paths lined with oak trees. Her children would run ahead of her, their laughter breaking through the stillness. In those moments, she felt a kind of peace she hadn't known in months, but it was the kind that comes only after a storm, beautiful, but heavy with what it has survived. William came to her not long after. It was early December. The day was gray, the kind of British winter afternoon that seemed to absorb every sound. He arrived without the usual entourage, without photographers or aides, just himself, a man stripped of titles and protocol. He stood in the doorway of the sitting room where Catherine was reading. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, in a voice softer than she remembered, he said, "Kate, I'm sorry for everything the past months have put you through." She looked up, and their eyes met. There was no anger in her regard, only a deep, steady weariness. He went on, explaining how the rumors had spiraled out of control, how the press had twisted moments and faces into stories that weren't true. He told her he had never betrayed her, that the bond they shared was stronger than gossip. He said all the words he needed to say, and perhaps all the words she had once longed to hear, but Catherine had changed. Illness alters something fundamental in a person. It burns away the illusions, leaving only what's real. And as she sat there listening to the man she had loved since university, she realized that forgiveness was not the same as forgetting. She closed her book, placed it gently on the table, and whispered, "I don't know if I believe you, but I can't do this fight anymore." William nodded. He didn't argue. He simply sat beside her, their silence saying everything their words could not. For a brief moment, they were just two people, two souls who had once dreamed of forever, now quietly negotiating the ruins of what that dream had become. Christmas came, and the couple appeared together again. At Sandringham, they walked side by side, greeting the crowds, waving, smiling. To the cameras, they looked united, the picture of resilience, a royal couple overcoming adversity. The headlines read, "Catherine returns stronger than ever, and the Wales family shines again." But those who looked closely could see it, the way her hand rested a little too loosely in his, the flicker of distance in her eyes. Behind closed doors, Catherine focused on her children. George was growing tall and thoughtful. Charlotte had her mother's quiet strength, and little Louis was still innocent enough to see joy in everything. They were her anchor. She told herself that whatever pain lingered between her and William, it must not touch them. For their sake, she chose peace, even if it meant swallowing her own doubts. William, for his part, tried. He spent more time at home, joined Catherine in public engagements, and often spoke of her courage in private briefings. There were moments when he seemed genuinely remorseful, moments when the man she fell in love with seemed to resurface, kind, attentive, almost tender. But then there were others when he drifted away again, lost in duty, in silence, in something she could no longer reach. Catherine learned to smile through it at charity events. She looked radiant. In photographs, she was every inch the perfect future queen, graceful, poised, composed. Yet those closest to her knew that the light in her had dimmed. Her laughter came less easily. Her eyes no longer lingered on William the way they once did. And though she forgave him, some invisible wall remained, one that neither apology nor affection could tear down. Sometimes, late at night, she would stand by the window of their Kensington apartment, watching the London skyline fade into mist. There was a stillness in those hours that made everything feel raw again. She would think of the vows they had made on that bright April morning in Westminster Abbey, of the promises whispered when the world was not watching. And she would wonder if the love they once shared had been strong enough to survive not just illness, but betrayal, or even the fear of it. For all the strength she had shown, there were nights when she still cried quietly, her tears unseen, her pain unheard. Yet by dawn she would gather herself, dress, and face the world once more. Because Catherine had learned something that only those who have suffered truly understand. That forgiveness is not about trust, it is about survival. And so the family carried on. Publicly, they were united, smiling, hopeful. Privately, they were fragile, balancing their lives on unspoken truths. The world moved on, believing the storm had passed. But deep inside, Catherine knew that calm can sometimes be the most dangerous part of a storm. It deceives you into thinking it's over, until the next wave arrives. And that wave was coming. A year later, on the 6th of September, 2025, destiny would test her once again, this time in the most brutal and undeniable way. September 6th, 2025. The night was quiet at Adelaide Cottage. The lights in the children's rooms had long been turned off, and the soft rustle of the autumn wind drifted through the curtains. Catherine sat alone in the study, her laptop open, sorting through emails from the palace regarding an upcoming charity event. Everything seemed ordinary until her phone, lying face down beside her, lit up with a message meant for William. It wasn't hers, but his. He had left it on the table, unlocked. When he went upstairs to check on the children, at first she didn't mean to look, but something had taught her, a quiet, uneasy instinct, made her reach out. What she saw next shattered the fragile peace she had fought so hard to rebuild. The screen revealed a familiar name, Rose, and beneath it, a message that was short, casual, but far too intimate for mere friendship. I miss our walks. You promised we'd find time again soon. Her fingers froze. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. The sound of her own heartbeat seemed to fill the room. Catherine scrolled up slowly, her hand trembling. The messages weren't old, they were recent, spanning months. Little exchanges sent in the dead of night. Private jokes. Memories that no one else should have shared. It was not the discovery of betrayal that hurt most, but the quiet realization that it had never really stopped, even after her illness. Even after he had held her hands and promised that nothing mattered more than family. She set the phone down gently, as if it might burn her. For minutes, she sat motionless, her eyes unfocused, staring into the dim light. The truth settled over her like ice, slow, suffocating, irreversible. When William walked back into the room, he noticed her stillness immediately. "Kate," he said softly, almost cautious. She turned to him, her face calm, but her eyes hollow. She didn't ask a single question, didn't shout, didn't cry. Her silence said everything. In that look, William saw it the moment he lost her completely. Not to another man, not to scandal or sickness, but to disappointment so deep it could no longer be mended. He tried to speak. "I can explain," he whispered, but she only shook her head slowly, her voice barely more than air. "There's nothing left to explain." She rose quietly, leaving the phone where it was, and walked out of the room. Upstairs, she paused by the children's doors, listening to their soft breathing. For them, she would endure anything. But this was too much to bear within the same walls. By dawn, a single car left the cottage. Inside, Catherine sat in silence, looking out at the gray horizon as the driver took her and the children to Sandringham. She didn't make an announcement. There was no confrontation, no statement to the press, just a quiet retreat, an act of dignity wrapped around heartbreak. Within hours, palace aides noticed her absence. Questions began circulating discreetly among staff. William canceled his scheduled engagements, citing family reasons. Behind the gilded doors, an uneasy stillness spread. A close friend later confided to the Times, "She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply left. And that's how you know she's done." William spent that night alone. The same house that once echoed with laughter now felt unbearably empty. He scrolled through old photographs, her smile, the children's laughter, the life they had built together, and for the first time, he understood what he had truly lost. Trust, respect, love, and the woman who had stood by him through every trial now walked away, not in anger, but in quiet sorrow. The next morning, the palace issued no comment. Reporters camped outside the gates, hungry for a statement, but none came. The official silence was deafening, and as days turned into weeks, that silence began to feed the fire. Across Britain, whispers grew louder. Had the story of Charles and Diana just begun again, under new names, Inside the walls of Sandringham, Catherine focused on her children, shielding them from the noise. She smiled for them, but behind closed doors, her eyes often lingered on the horizon, distant and unreadable. Because deep down, she knew. Some wounds don't heal with time. They only learn how to hide behind grace. The morning after the storm broke, every major British newspaper carried the same headline: William and Catherine living apart. Reporters camped outside Adelaide Cottage, but there was no sign of movement behind the iron gates. The usually peaceful Windsor estate seemed frozen in time, but there, its silence heavier than any statement the palace could have issued. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was equally tense. King Charles, still recovering from his own health battles, was said to be deeply saddened by the news. Those close to him whispered that the king saw a reflection of his own past, a haunting echo of the cracks that once destroyed his marriage to Diana. He had hoped William and Catherine would be the generation to finally break that cycle. Camilla, meanwhile, chose to remain silent. She did not attend public engagements for several years, preferring to stay out of sight. But sources close to her said she understood all too well the pain of being at the center of royal scandal, both as the woman once blamed for a marriage's downfall and as a wife who had endured decades of public scrutiny. She knows what it feels like, one insider revealed softly. But this time, she's not the villain. The public, however, was anything but calm. Across Britain and beyond, social media erupted. Some fans expressed heartbreak for Catherine, calling her the modern Diana and praising her quiet strength. Others condemned William for betraying the image of loyalty and steadiness he had built for years. History repeats itself. One headline declared, another read, "From Diana to Catherine, has the curse of the crown returned?" Through it all, Kensington Palace maintained its carefully measured tone. A single 12-word statement was released. The Prince and Princess of Wales will not comment on private matters. Nothing more. Yet that silence only fueled the fire. Royal correspondents dissected every photograph, every gesture from recent months, searching for signs they had missed. The absence of Catherine's wedding ring in one public appearance, the separate cars leaving a charity event, the sudden cancellation of their family trip to Balmoral. Meanwhile, the people of Britain, a nation that had once celebrated William and Catherine's marriage is proof that fairy tales could exist, were left in disbelief. Outside the palace gates, bouquets of flowers appeared overnight. Some bore messages written in trembling hands: "Stay strong, Catherine." As others were far harsher: "William, you broke her heart again." In the quiet of her new home, said to be a private residence near Windsor, Catherine focused on her 3 children. She did not speak publicly, nor did she allow staff to brief the press. To those closest to her, she was calm, almost too calm. She's learned that silence can be the strongest weapon. A close aide confided, King Charles called William to Balmoral for a private discussion. The details of that conversation were never disclosed, but insiders described it as difficult and emotional. Some claim the king reminded his son of the night Diana fled the palace, the night everything began to unravel. Others say Charles simply told him, "You must not lose her." But perhaps the most haunting part of it all was the eerie familiarity. To many Britons, the sight of another Princess of Wales suffering in silence felt like déjà vu. Diana's face appeared on magazine covers once more, side by side with Catherine's. 2 women, decades apart, both crushed by the weight of the same crown. Maybe, the narrator reflects softly, in the world of crowns and power, happiness is the rarest luxury of all. The palace's silence continues, but across the United Kingdom, one question now echoes louder than ever. A question that chills even the most loyal royalists. Is this how history repeats itself again? And so, as the world watches and speculates, one truth remains unshakable. Once more, Britain finds itself haunted by the same tragic story. The tragedy of the woman who bears the title, Princess of Wales. They say that wounds of the heart may heal, but they never truly disappear. And within the cold, silent walls of the palace, perhaps Catherine has come to understand that real strength is not in holding on, but in letting go, to finally heal herself. For years, she stood as the symbol of grace, loyalty, and resilience, the woman who restored faith in royal love. Yet behind that serene smile lies a story of pain, sacrifice, and a quiet kind of courage that no crown can conceal. Now, as the world watches in uncertainty, one truth remains. Even princesses bleed, and even palaces can feel unbearably lonely. So, what do you think? Will Princess Catherine forgive once more? Or has the fairy tale finally reached its tragic end?